Week 10 is here, and we are going to dive right in it today. The starts and sits from every single matchup. I got my buddy Ty with me, and Ty, we got a full slate ready to go. Are you ready for this? Are you ready to just grind through this all?
I am. I am very sad that I miss out on your guys' fun exercise from the last episode and redrafting what we know now and redrafting in fantasy football. So I'm here to make up for it, if that makes sense.
For sure. Well, we thank you if you're joining on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe there, hit those notifications so you don't miss any content. We got so much stuff coming at you if you're on the audio pod. Thank you for tuning in there. But Ty, like I said, I'm not going to waste any more time because we got 14 matchups to discuss. So that means at least 28 players. And I promise you we're bringing you more than that. So let's jump right in. Let me start by saying this might be the most stacked bye week I've ever seen. We got Kansas City, Miami, Philly, and the Rams. I mean, this is crazy. But
three out of the 4 teams, but
3 out of the 4, and then the Rams still got Puka and Cooper Kupp. So from a fantasy perspective, it's just absolutely ridiculous. But nevertheless, we do have to talk about it. Maybe the grossest Thursday night football game to ever exist. I don't know what it is with the NFL wanting to run back just terrible Chicago Thursday night football games, but we had it earlier with Washington. Now we get it with Carolina. We get it was Chicago 1-5 and Carolina's 0-6. Does Chicago have 2 wins or just 1? I think they have 2.
Chicago's 2-7 and Carolina is 1-8.
Oh my goodness, we are in week 10. Why am I saying 0-6? I am. Oof, yeah, that was ridiculous. Nevertheless, I do think that Chicago actually wants to win this one, even though they want a worse pick because they have the Carolina pick. So they would rather have Carolina solidify themselves as that first overall pick with no wins. Do you think that's the game plan here? You go out and you try to clobber them to make sure that they stay winless?
Or
do you try to bring both picks closer to the front?
I'm just trying to think about this with Tyson Bagent as the quarterback because Justin Fields has already been listed as doubtful as of Wednesday afternoon. Oh. So what's happening here? I mean, it's really not like you can't lose scenario for Chicago because if you win, you get a better pick because it's Carolina's pick. But if you lose, you then get 2 picks that are closer together.
So I guess they're open for a tie.
Right. So it's like, shoot for the tie. This is just an ugly matchup all around. And I feel bad if you're relying on really any player in this game besides like Adam Thielen, because Adam Thielen has just been kind of defying logic at this point. But again, like everyone else in this game is just like, if you are banking on these guys, it's going to be a rough week 10. I almost said week 9. It's week 10.
I can't believe we are already in week 10. It is just, I mean, fantasy playoffs are starting like 4-5 weeks is just insane. But like you said, Adam Thielen is an obvious one in this one. And just if you're new to this, we're going to break down obvious players from each matchup, the start and a sit. Sometimes we'll have 2 starts. Sometimes we won't have 1. Just depending on what the game warrants. DJ Moore is probably the other obvious start in this one. I'm not saying it's going to be pretty, but at this point with what DJ Moore has put out, you're probably your wide receiver 2. You probably don't have a ton of better options, especially with the 4 teams that are out right now by. So DJ Moore is probably the other one. Tyler, we're going to talk about the 2 running backs in this matchup on either side. The 2 starting running backs, just like we all thought week 1, the 2 starting running backs in this matchup are going to be Deonta Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. Which one do you want to start with? I will leave it up to you.
I really don't want to talk about either, if I'm being completely honest. Like that's how I feel just about this game in general. But let's start with Chuba Hubbard. Okay. The Carolina Panthers backfield has gone through some changes recently, where Chuba Hubbard is now dominating snaps. Yeah. Like it's not 50-50. It's not a 60-40.
80-20.
It is astounding. Here's the thing, though. Ever since Matt Eberflus took over the play calling duties on the defense, Chicago has been playing a lot better against the run, at least. They're still a little suspect in the pass game, but on the run, they are allowing, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. No, can't count. 8. Can't count. 8. 8. Jeez, it's a rough one. They're allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs since week 7. So they have really, really shorted up on the run game. I don't feel great about Chuba Hubbard. I don't feel great about Miles Sanders. So I hope you have a different option than Chuba Hubbard, because it's a rough one for those two.
Yes, and if on the other side of the ball, if you were looking for a gross start, if you are, hey, I'm at the bottom of the barrel here, Deonta Foreman's not a bad start. He's led this backfield over the last couple of games, even with Roschon Johnson being back. Carolina is allowing the 3rd most yards to running backs over the last 5 weeks. The most fantasy points to the position, 30 a game. Obviously, with Bajan at quarterback, he's not going to be stealing rushing yards in the same way Justin Fields would. So if you are in need of a gross start, a plug and play at the running back position, Deonta Foreman could be that. But man, I'm not saying he's gonna be a top 15 guy this week, but I do think that he's a guy that you can put in and give you 8 points at 8 to 12 points, depending on if he scores or not. Which I'm not going to bank on, that's for sure. Although I guess it's in our play of the week for Lucas for Thursday Night Football, so I guess we are banking on it a little.
Well, are we really though? That's the thing. Are we really though?
That's true. All righty, let's move to Germany. We're going back to back, right? This game's in Germany, correct?
This is in Germany. Frankfurt, part 2.
So I just like you thought too, like it's 7 years ago. If you're like, hey, we're going to be watching football in Germany, we got
totally called this way back then. Totally did.
We got some obvious ones in this one. JT, obviously. I think Michael Pittman at this point has to be an obvious start. He has been he's a top 15 wide receiver. He's been very consistently getting targets in this offense. And then I think Ramondre, through the receiving game, has kind of earned this status. It helps. We've talked about it so many times about just how thin the running back position is that, would make him an obvious start. But other than that, Ty, is there anybody in this game at all that you want to touch?
No, really, no. I mean, so much so that I'm just gonna come back with some more pointers about the obvious starts, because
beautiful.
I mean, Jonathan Taylor is now by a mile, by a country mile, the lead back in this backfield. Last week, JT dominated snap count 43-11.
Yeah.
This backfield is his. New England's secondary is still pretty suspect. They're allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers since week 7. So Michael Pittman is a great start this week. And Ramondre, just because the Patriots wide receiver room is ugly and disgusting, they have really no choice but to give the ball to Ramondre. So he's another one to fire up. Zach Moss, I know it's been a great start for the year. We're week 10. First half of the year. It's been a great first half of the year for Zach Moss, but I don't think he's playable anymore after.
We've been warning you guys.
Yeah. The name that I do want to throw back to you, though, is Josh Downs. He did not participate in practice on Wednesday. Again, New England allowing some of the most fantasy points to wide receivers. If he plays, are you interested in putting him in, or are you just sticking with Michael Pittman as the only Colts wide receiver to touch a lineup this week?
You mentioned it. The Patriots secondary has been suspect. JC Jackson, can you double check this for me? That he
came from Rap Sheet.
So that's what I thought too. He's not traveling with the team. I mean, obviously JC Jackson hasn't been, an absolute stud, but it's just another piece of the puzzle that will be missing going over there. In his 4 healthy weeks, he saw 6, 8, 6, and 9 targets. Obviously, last week he wasn't healthy, and that's why he's on the injury report. If he misses time, though, do not try and throw in Alec Pierce or
Isaiah
another.
McKenzie or
Yes, you stay away. That it's just the three obvious ones. You move on, and that's kind of where you go from there. We'll move on to the Cleveland Baltimore game. And, at first I was like, man, there's got to be a lot of obvious starts in this one. But I really don't think there are that many obvious starts. I have Lamar, Mark Andrews, Amari Cooper. Maybe you could say Zay Flowers. But again, it's a tough matchup. And he's still a rookie, right? We're not expecting extreme consistency out of him at this point. But the two guys I do want to really discuss are these running backs, right? I think they've been on two opposite ends of the spectrum. Jerome Ford has been seeing the work in this last game where he was finally healthy, finally kind of regained his role, but was extremely inefficient. He had 20 attempts, 7 targets, and he averaged 2.4 yards per carry. And even with the targets, he didn't do a whole lot. The Ravens are allowing 18.4 fantasy points to running backs. That's top 7 for least amount allowed. On the opposite side, Gus Edwards, 3 straight top 12 finishes, 6 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He's averaging 65 rush yards a game. And the Browns are pretty much the same as the Ravens on the rush side of the ball, only 18.2 fantasy points to running backs in that same stretch. But then you also had the little Keaton Mitchell breakout. Like, is that something you're worried about? And then, so I'll ask you a 2-parter. Is that something you're worried about for Gus Edwards? And then at the same time, which running back would you lean in this matchup if you had to pick one? And you might not want to pick either, but if you got to pick one, who you lean in?
So I'll start with Gus Edwards in this Keaton Mitchell aspect. There's no guarantee that Keaton Mitchell gets the same amount of, looks, and when I say looks, I mean like having his name called upon. Mm-hmm. There's really no guarantee of that happening again this week. So you can take that as a vote of confidence for Gus Edwards, but at the same time, that unpredictability does kind of make me hesitate a little bit with Gus Edwards. And I mentioned it last week. Like, Gus Edwards is really now just like a touchdown dependent running back, in my opinion. He's getting 0 receiving work. So it is, do you think he can get into the end zone? And over the last couple of weeks, he has. I mean, he's got 6 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah. So
can he score? That's his only way to relevancy. I mean, I'll just say this: he's a Gabe Davis of running backs. Like, that's really about it. So I hesitate a little bit when it comes to Gus Edwards, and that's why I'm going to say Jerome Ford, because last week what we did see from Jerome Ford, despite a very, very inefficient, rushing performance, he had 7 targets, and I'm pretty sure it was 5 or 6 receptions, and that helped him, finish as a running back 17 on the week. So I would say, like, PPR is Jerome Ford. If it's half PPR or standard, you're probably going to lean Gus Edwards and just kind of bank on the chance that he scores. But to be honest, I don't feel great about either of these guys with this matchup. And I know this is AFC North divisional rivalry game, so maybe there's an opportunity where we just see a huge rushing game. I just, with how the defenses have performed this year, I just don't feel great about either of them, though.
I would agree completely. And speaking of, we're talking, this is going to be, a bloodbath. They're going to be back and forth. I would stay away from Deshaun Watson in this one. He had 18 fantasy points this last week. One of his touchdowns was a little fluky. He threw it off the defensive lineman's helmet and it bounces up to Amari Cooper. Baltimore is allowing just 11 fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 5 games. This defense has just been blowing teams out. And on top of that, Deshaun Watson only ran the ball 3 times this last game. I don't think Deshaun Watson's looking to run, especially with the way his shoulder has been bugging him. So if he doesn't have that rushing, upside on top of it, I'm not going to bank on Deshaun Watson finding, 250 and 3 or 300 and 2 for a quarterback one day. I would look elsewhere. But obviously, we always hesitate saying sit quarterbacks and tight ends because it does depend, if it's him or Tommy DeVito, you're starting Deshaun Watson. But if it's,
Right. Well, and especially this week when you've got Mahomes, Tua, and Hurts all on bye.
For sure.
Like, you
may have no choice.
You may have no choice, but
yes,
yeah, it doesn't. Signs point to this not working out for Deshaun Watson, and now saying that out loud, you know what's going to happen? He's going to finish as a quarterback 1 overall this week.
Oh, 100%, 100%.
Because like, I don't know if this has been expressed or not. No matter how obvious it may look sometimes that it's not a good matchup. Defenses have been playing well against specific quarterbacks and whatnot. All signs may be telling you don't play, and the opposite is going to happen. But there's no way you can predict that. So just err on the side of caution. That's really the message when it comes to a guy like Deshaun Watson.
For sure. This next game is kind of gross from a fan's perspective, let's be honest. It's Green Bay at Pittsburgh. He's starting Deontay. After last week, you got to start Aaron Jones, 24 touches. It was his backfield again. He looked 17 fantasy points, I think. I want to give you a second. This is your guy. I want you to tell us, what do we think about George Pickens? What do we do with George Pickens in this one? Are you starting him? Are you confident in him? What do you think? How are we feeling as the George Pickens stan?
Well, here's the thing. He only put up like 2 points in PPR formats last week. Right. Should have had a touchdown. Don't know how he doesn't see the fact
easiest toe drag in the history of the world.
I don't get this. And to me, that's a concentration thing, because you look at pictures and how much space he had between where he caught the ball on the sideline, and you go, I could toe drag that. Like I don't know if you notice, but I don't play football. I don't play professional football, but I could even toe drag that. Like, there was a ton of space. And for a guy like George Pickens, you would expect him to do that. And like I said, I just think that's a concentration thing. I think it's a mentality thing. And even after the game too, he's completely checked out. Like, he just does not care what's happening. And there was a video that came out. I saw this on Twitter. Deontay Johnson scores his touchdown. Pickens just jogs back to the bench and just goes and sits down. So
it's Deontay's first touchdown in like 700 some days or something like that.
The dude is just checked out, and I think he's checked out because he doesn't like the role or how the offense is operating, because it's operating without him at this point.
Yeah, I mean it runs through Deontay. Honestly, is what they're doing.
Well, I mean it's Mike Tomlin. It is. Exactly like what Mike Tomlin wants. Heavy run game, and then a very, very not minimal, but like consolidated passing attack.
Yeah, quick passes. You get the ball out, get your 7 yards, move on. And that's Deontay's bread and butter. So for me, I as the George Pickens stan on this podcast, I need to see a game where George Pickens is actually, being looked at rather than just a decoy on the field, because that's what it's been lately with him. For sure. And I do want to point this out. So the Pittsburgh Steelers had their bye 3 weeks ago. And Ty on this podcast very quietly said, I don't know if you guys remember, but last year, Najee Harris, after the bye, kind of started to turn on. I'm not telling you to go buy him. Ty was not.
Please don't.
He was not telling you to go buy him, but he did quietly say, hey, I just want to remind you of this. And it's starting to come true. So is Jalen Warren kind of out of flex consideration right now for you?
For me, he is. I'm gonna pull up his stat line from last week, because I don't want to necessarily say that he got lucky with his production last week. But 11 carries for 88 yards. To me, when he has previously put up 5 for 19, 6 for 32, 9 for 40, 8 for 29, I just don't think averaging 8 yards a carry is all that sticky, is all that doable again for the guy. And especially when Najee Harris is becoming the guy in this backfield. I mean, over the last 3 weeks since coming out of the bye week, Najee Harris is dominating snaps 56% to 47%. And it was like that already before the bye week, but for whatever reason now, it's just working with Najee Harris as the running back on the field. And Jaylen Warren's one saving grace was his receiving floor. And since the bye week, Najee Harris is running more routes than Jaylen Warren. So I don't know how much of this, like, Jaylen Warren is kind of the sneaky flex, is a guaranteed like 7-8 points a week if you need a fill in as a running back to sure. Like, I think those days are over for Jaylen Warren.
Yeah. Which is a bummer because he looks good on the field. But Najee looks good right now. Like
Najee looks good now.
Najee looks, I think, the best since his rookie season that we've seen. I mean, he's running hard downhill. And I think that's kind of what he needed. I think he needs the Jaylen Warren to do all the stuff dancing around so they can just be like, Najee, run in a straight line as hard as you can and go pick up yards. And that's what he's been pretty good at.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it too before we started recording. It's really been ever since Deontay Johnson has came back that we've seen this kind of drop in usage for Jaylen Warren. And it kind of makes sense in that sense of quick and short passes. You don't really need to look to Jaylen Warren as much now when you've got Deontay Johnson. And,
for sure.
Warren dominates long down and distance snaps still, but that's to be expected.
Yeah. He's a quicker back.
Yeah, exactly.
All righty. Next we got the 49ers at Jacksonville. And I think this is an interesting matchup.
And watch San Francisco just blow them out by 40.
I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. Both teams coming off the bye week. I do think that's something to be noted. Both teams, they've got an elite fantasy running back right now. You got CMC and Travis Etienne. Both got a solid but not great for fantasy tight end in Evan Ingram and George Kittle. I think George Kittle's a little bit, is a tier higher than Evan Ingram right now, but I don't think either of them are quite in the top three. So I think you're starting all four. I think Christian Kirk and Brandon Ayuk have earned, enough to be consistent starters in your lineup. I think that on a week-to-week basis, you're starting them. And then you got two guys that everybody wants to be the guy in this offense. Everybody kind of is like, they have so much talent, but they haven't been amazing for fantasy as of late. Debo was before he got hurt, but that was without Brandon Ayuk as well. Calvin Ridley will start with. I think he personally has to be a start in this one. We talked a lot about Zay Jones and how much better Calvin Ridley does than Zay Jones. Zay Jones left practice early today. I'm going to read the report.
He left early?
He did say it's not a setback. This is what he was expecting to do. However, Coach Doug Peterson said that a stint on the injured reserve was possible, but it looks like Jones will avoid that for the time being, which does not give me hope for him probably starting in the next 2 weeks. If they're considering having him sit out for the next 4, it just sounds like he's been battling this knee and hasn't quite got back to it. Ty, let's hear this frustration that you're going through as a fantasy manager.
I just don't want. So this is more so football than it is fantasy football. So I don't know exactly how relevant this is going to be, but they've had 4 weeks since Zay Jones left the game against Buffalo.
Yeah.
Why don't you just put him on injured reserve? I don't understand that. Like, I don't get the ambiguity. I think that's what it comes down to. And as a fantasy manager, I need black and white. Yeah. And Doug Peterson, ever since the offseason, has lived in this gray area.
Yeah. He tells you one thing, does another.
Exactly. We need multiple backs. In the current NFL, you need multiple backs. And now look at Travis Etienne. Like,
he's going to see almost 400 touches this year.
Exactly. Like, it's one of those, like, it's frustrating as a fantasy manager, and especially if you have Calvin Ridley, right? Because you're kind of hoping that Zay Jones comes back at some point, but he just never has. Mm-hmm. And then this happens in practice today, and now they're saying, well, it was planned and whatnot. And you're like, was it though?
Yeah.
Like, make it make sense, please, because that would help all of us out.
For sure. So Calvin Ridley, in these last 4 weeks, has actually been seeing a decent amount of targets 8, 4, and 10. Finishes as a wide receiver 9 and wide receiver 28 in those stretches. The 2 other games weren't great, but this San Francisco team has struggled against the pass for the last couple of weeks. And really the season as a whole, they're giving the third most points per game over their last 4 games. And you got to think at some point this Jacksonville offense is going to start figuring it out. They've just looked not good, ever since the start of the year. They were a team that that a lot of people thought were going to take a step forward. I don't know. Do you have the same confidence I do in Calvin Ridley this week as a start? Or are you a little more hesitant?
I do have a little more confidence. I mean, you look at the last 3 games for the Jaguars coming out of the bye. Now that's I think that's a discussion point in itself, is that Jacksonville's coming off the bye. So with all the curveballs that we've seen from Jacksonville, we may see something completely different this week. But the last 3 weeks going into the bye, Calvin Ridley was actually leading Jaguars wide receivers in target share. He had a 25% target share. And you look at San Francisco since week 7, they've given up the most fantasy points to wide receivers that line up out wide. And guess who's been lining up out wide lately for the Jaguars? I shouldn't say lately. It's been all year.
Yeah. Calvin Ridley.
It's Calvin Ridley. So I think it's one of the, I think signs point to I think Calvin Ridley is okay to fire up this week, but I think you have to do that with the understanding that Calvin Ridley does have a pretty low floor and the ceiling is still to be determined.
For sure. And on the other side of the ball, we got Deebo Samuel, and he's full go at practice. But remember, the last time he came back from injury, he had 0 targets in that game. When he is on the field with one of Kittle or Ayuk, he averages 18.6 points per game over the last 2 years. When both of them are out there, he averages only 13.3, a 5-point drop when both of them are playing, and both of them will be playing. In his first 3 games to start the season, he had 7, 9, and 12 targets, and then after he got banged up, came back, he saw 0, 3, and 1. In the game he had 1, he did only play 15% of snaps. Jacksonville has been about as bad as San Francisco over the last 4 games as well, giving up the 4th most points to wide receivers. Are you firing up Deebo? Or are you thinking I need to give him a game? Or is he, depending on who you have? Or what are your thoughts on Deebo? Because he's just a confusing situation.
Well, so we know this wide receiver room in San Francisco to really be, they have a man beater in Brandon Ayuk. They have a zone beater in Deebo Samuel. So and then they rely heavily on Christian McCaffrey, and then it really is then between Kittle, Ayuk, and Deebo, is Deebo 1A, and then Kittle and Ayuk are then fighting for 1B. So I then go to what is Jacksonville's tendencies in coverage? And they do play a lot of zone. So that does give me some optimism for Deebo Samuel. So I think he's an okay flex this week. But I feel like he's kind of similar to Calvin Ridley in the sense that there is a pretty low floor and there's a ceiling that is yet to be determined. I hate saying that I don't know, but it truly is one of those, I really don't know, but the signs point to yes.
Yeah, I'm risking it in the one league that I do have him in this week. I think Deebo is a good enough wide receiver that if he is fully healthy, I don't think they're going to rush him back again like they did earlier. I think at this point, coming off the bye, he's going to be fully healthy. So I think they are going to use him. Let's move on then to the New Orleans Saints at our Minnesota Vikings, our shocking Minnesota Vikings, our Josh Dobbs-led Minnesota Vikings. Our obvious starts in this one are, of course, Alvin Kamara, TJ Hawkinson. I think Chris Olave has to be. And then I think at this point, Taysom Hill.
Yeah.
You got to lock him in. It's been ridiculous just how good he has been over the last couple of weeks, especially at the tight end position. 2 20-point weeks in a row, 2 double-digit weeks before that. And he's not, he's doing it on the ground, running the ball in. He's been their goal line back. He's kind of doing what we thought Jamal Williams would do, honestly.
Yeah, which is kind of confusing them why they went out and gave the money that they did to Jamal. But hey, I guess you don't fix what ain't broke.
Yeah. And the Vikings, have always, I guess Brian Flores is the new defensive coordinator. So hopefully those struggles against Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara are gone, but you never know. On the Both are starting to sit are actually from the Vikings in this one. Or sit, I have as Alexander Madison. I want to hear your thoughts on this because obviously Cam Akers is out for the season. So Alexander Madison is going to be all alone. But New Orleans is only the 5th fewest points running backs over the last 5 games. And listen to this. Alexander Madison has had one game over 3.3 yards per carry in his last 5 games.
Yikes.
It's been like I think it was 3.2, 2.1. And then he had a 4.4, and then it was like 1.6, and then 2.1. It just doesn't interest me, right? Last game he was bailed out by the fact he had a receiving touchdown. I'm not banking on him having a receiving touchdown again. I don't think he's going to find the end rushing touchdown. If I don't think he's going to score, and I don't think he's going to get a big reception in this one, so I'm just not super excited about Alexander Madison. I don't know what your thoughts are on him.
No, I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen I don't want to say more productive after you just listed off his yards per carry, but there was a better looking Madison just based on eye test when they started giving Cam Akers more touches.
Yep.
And Wes Phillips, the offensive coordinator for the Vikings, has already come out and said like we're going to see some more Ty Chandler in this offense. So there's some hope there, but the eye test, as better as the eye test has been lately with Madison, it hasn't exactly that doesn't exactly equate fantasy production. And like you said, I'm not banking on a 4th receiving touchdown from him in this game. So I think it is justified to leave him on your bench this week.
For sure. And then the Vikings rookie sensation, Jordan Addison. Are you confident in starting them this week with Dobbs getting another week in this offense? Are you staying away? How are you feeling about Jordan Addison? I
think what it comes down to for Addison is just like, well, who else then? Right? Like, TJ Hawkinson is questionable. He's going to be questionable pretty much throughout the entirety of the week with his rib injury. So if let's say he doesn't play, he's got to throw to somebody. Yeah. And KJ Osborne is more than likely going to be out. I doubt he plays after just how serious that hit looked. Like, I doubt he plays. So you are then relying on either Josh Oliver, Brandon Powell, Tristan Jackson. Like Jordan Addison is head and shoulders and then some over the rest of those guys. So I think it is just kind of like by default, you kind of have to play him.
And for those of you who saw the update that Jefferson's window was activated, they asked Kevin O'Connell about him coming back, and he said it'd be a little aggressive for him to come back this week. And the fact that, they don't have Kirk right now, the fact that they are on a little winning streak, I don't think they really feel a need to push him back, risk of re-injury. So sounds like Jefferson will not be playing.
I mean, hear us out though. Like, we would love Jefferson to play this week.
Oh, 100%, 100%. But if he's healthy, put him out there. But if he's not healthy, I don't want to see him touch the field either at the same time.
Right. I mean, cooler heads need to prevail here.
Yes. Yep, and I think they will. Our last game before we take a quick break with our friends over at Underdog, we got Houston at Cincinnati, which I think if you asked us at the beginning of the year, it would have been like, Houston at Cincinnati. But now it feels like a pretty interesting game, especially with what C.J. Stroud just did last week. 450 yards, 5 tutties. I think he's got to be an obvious start. I don't see how you could bench him after what he just did last week. I mean, unless you have Mahomes, but him, Tua, and Jalen Hurts are all on bye this week. So, unless you got Josh Allen or Justin Herbert, I'm honestly firing up CJ Stroud this week. A couple other obvious guys, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, but both of them have an injury label right now. So those are both players to watch. Joe Mixon, it's kind of like in that Ramondre tier, I feel like. So you're probably starting him. He's actually performed pretty well over the last 2 weeks. And then Joe Burrow, of course. I'll keep our start real simple. It's Tyler Boyd.
Just like you all guessed it would be.
It is. It's only Tyler Boyd, though, if Jamar Chase or T. Higgins misses time, right? We're not saying start Tyler Boyd if they're both playing. I do want to just real quick. We got those Houston wide receivers, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Noah Brown. Are you trusting any of them this week? How are you navigating that situation?
I hate this discussion. Like,
And this isn't on the doc, so I just threw this to Ty, and he was not ready for it.
Man, I mentioned this in our group chat with me, Cam, and Lucas, and I was like, what the heck do we make of this Houston wide receiver room? And I could tell that it was something that you guys didn't really want to talk about because neither of you really gave like a definitive answer on what you thought. It was really just kind of like,
because we don't know what to think.
Exactly. I think the thing to note for this matchup though is that Cincinnati is done pretty well against opposing wide receivers. Like they do not allow many fantasy points. So I don't know if there's a metric out there that'll tell you like it's this Texans wide receiver that you should look at over the other two. I mean, and I say two, like, we say Noah Brown just because of what he did, but if Robert Woods comes back, that makes it even more murky.
Yeah.
That makes it even more difficult to really determine who to rely on. So in that scenario, I feel like you might just have to pivot somewhere else, but I
let it figure out.
Honestly, yeah, pretty much.
Let me ask you a question from the last game. We got Michael Thomas or one of these Texans wide receivers. Which way are you going?
Cade Otton.
Gotta love it.
Yeah, yikes. It's ugly. I mean, I would probably take one of the Texans wide receivers, but it really depends on which one it is. Because if it's,
I would say Nico Collins, Tank Dell are the two that you should be considering starting. And I wouldn't start either with confidence.
I mean, I will spoil this because we release our weekly rankings that you can find for free over on our Chalkboard page, and the link for that is in the description below. But when we are putting the list together from the fellas, I can guarantee you that in my own personal list, I'm literally going to have Nico Collins and Tank Dell like right next to each other because how can you choose between the two? Like, and like, it'll be easy if you have one or the other on your team. But like, when you're like figuring out like, who do I think is going to have the better week? It's a coin flip probably. Yep. Like that's really how it feels.
For sure. All right. And then our sit, I'm just going to say it super quick. See some running backs. If you're still trying to figure this out, don't. They haven't scored. Neither of them have scored over 15 fantasy points so far this year. They haven't hit 10 fantasy points since week 4. And since he is top 10 against fantasy running backs for the last 4 weeks, I'm not going to make it any more complicated than that. Just do not under any. It doesn't matter if it's just Singletary. It doesn't matter if it's just Pierce. It doesn't matter if it's do not. And with that, we are going to take a quick break and hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
And we're back. I don't even know. I gotta find my own thing because I can't just copy Lucas's.
Well, not only did you copy Lucas, but you sounded like someone else on a very different YouTube channel than ours.
Who?
BDGE.
Is that what they sound like? I've never watched it.
That's what Nick does. Welcome back. And I can't even do it myself, but we don't copyright us.
Please. All right, we will jump into our first matchup of the second half of the show with Tennessee at Tampa Bay. Obvious starts at this point. I mean, you gotta stick with Rashad White after what he's done the last couple of weeks. Mike Evans, Derrick Henry, and I would say Chris Godwin. Ty, do you agree with that? Or do you think Chris Godwin's earned enough with the volume that he's been getting to be a for sure starter? Or do you think he's closer to like a Deebo Samuel level?
Well, it came back down to earth a little bit last week for Chris Godwin. So I'm less confident in Chris Godwin at this point, but I feel like Chris Godwin, just because of what we've seen in 3 of the last 4 weeks where he's gotten 7, 11, and 8 targets, you still have to put him in as a flex because at any given moment, does it really depend on just which side of the bed Baker Mayfield wakes up on? He wakes up on one side it's Mike Evans and the other is Chris Godwin. That's
sure.
That's how it feels at that moment. At this
does he want downfield or does he want to play it smart? That's kind of where he's at. We're going to talk about 2 starts in this one, both on the Tennessee side. I'll start with the wide receiver. You go with the quarterback, if that's all right with you.
Oh yeah.
So D-Hop, I feel like you got to start D-Hop. Nobody's given up more points to Bucs wide receivers over the last, or 2 wide receivers than the Bucs over the last 4 games. 52.5 fantasy points per game over the last 4. 10 wide receivers in that stretch. 10. So we're 2.5 a game have put up 50 plus yards. 6 have put up 70 plus yards, and 2 put up 115 plus in their last game. Obviously, it helps the CJ Stroud through 450 and 4. But they haven't been great before that. D-Hop, and they're going to have 7 touchdowns to wide receivers over this stretch as well. CJ Stroud had 4 touchdowns to wide receivers last week. And then D-Hop has seen 17 targets from Will Levis in the last 2 games on 188 yards. And then obviously he had 3 touchdowns in week 1. So he's been playing well. Now they get a bad defense. Treylon Burks is going to be out. There's not a lot of other people for him to throw to. So, yeah, I feel like D-Hop is definitely a start. And, Ty, you wanted to talk about the quarterback a little bit. Banana Man, Mayo, and the coffee, Will Levis himself.
He's that dude. He's that dude. I know that his second week against Pittsburgh wasn't the best fantasy performance, but if there was anything that was shown in that game, and it showed that he's the guy, that he is not afraid to be the starter of this team, that – I mean, Mike Vrabel has already came out on Tuesday and said that Will Levis is going to be their guy moving forward. So
makes sense.
Yeah. And again, I know a lot of people are going to look at, well, Tampa just gave up a ton of points to Houston, so all those stats are skewed. In the 3 games before Houston, Tampa was giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and they were giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers.
Ugh.
Yeah, like they just are leaking points like no tomorrow. So that's why, you know, the stats that Cam mentioned with DeAndre Hopkins, I feel confident with Will Levis. Just this is a great matchup for him. That's really what it comes down to.
For sure. And I do want to clear up, we've been using a lot of like last 4 weeks, last 5 weeks instead of the season as a whole. And that has a lot to do with just trends of defenses. We've talked about with the Bears. You saw it with the Lions last year, where first half of the year, just not great against the run. And then, you know, Lions last year turned it around in the second half of the year. So we don't want to look at the full because, you know, teams change, trades have happened, all this certain sort of stuff. So that's why we are using more of these trends when we're talking about that. Our next game is Detroit at Los Angeles. And I'm going to be honest, Ty, if they are a relevant player, you're pretty much starting them in this game. And if you're not, you know, there are obvious ones. This is the longest list we have. Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra, and Sam Laporta. Right? I mean, so the only ones you're probably even questioning are maybe Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. But are you going to really sit Gibbs after his last 2 weeks, even with Monty coming back? I don't think I can. I mean, maybe you can, and we know the role Monty has. I feel like you got to start both of them for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just on the chance that maybe Monty sees not a full workload right away, just coming back his first game back, or the chance that, yeah, like Monty gets his, but Gibbs is a little more involved too, right? Like there's a scenario that you can create that is a positive one for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, I mean, he's seen 14 receptions on 15 targets over the last 2 games. So, I mean, you know, even if he's not running the ball like he has been, he's still going to see, you know, work in the passing game, and he's averaging 5 yards a carry, right? I mean, you give him 7 carries, he's got you 30 yards on the ground, he's got you another eight points in the air, and then maybe he finds you a touchdown. So I think he's a solid start. And the only other guy I think we can even talk about in this game is, you know, Josh Palmer's out. Quentin Johnston isn't really, you know, hasn't come through yet. Jameson Williams hasn't come through. Is Jared Goff. I think he's a solid stream in this one. Like Chargers allowing 20 points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. He's coming off the bye. His team is finally healthy. And he's got 3 top 6 finishes on the year so far. Do you have any issues with Jared Goff being a stream this week if you've got a guy like Mahomes, Hurts, or Tua?
No, I like Jared Goff. I think the thing that limits him is just the touchdown production. And that is mainly just because they would rather give the ball to David Montgomery or Jahmyr Gibbs when they get into the red zone, which is great for us because you were watching, listening to the David Montgomery flag plant guy and the Jahmyr Gibbs number one fan.
For sure.
So like it's the saving grace though for Jared Goff, even if his touchdown production isn't there, is the fact that the Chargers are allowing the third most passing yards per game over that stretch that you mentioned the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And Jared Goff can take advantage of that. It was not too while ago when they were on the road in Tampa Bay and he put up over 300 passing yards.
Yeah, for sure.
He can certainly do it. So yes, he's a great streaming option this week.
Yes. Next week, Atlanta at Arizona.
Oh, please, let's get through this. Oh, please.
You still got to start Bijan, even if you don't want to.
Man.
Hollywood should be a start in this one. We got Kyler Murray finally coming back. I think Drake London's probably a start. He's probably, we've talked about.
Yeah,
you got to start him. Our start of the week is Trey McBride. And I think we both like McBride as a tight end, right? I know you were a big Ertz guy, so I know it hurts your heart that Ertz your heart that he got hurt again. But Zach Ertz last year when it was Kyler with no D-Hop was the tight end 3 in weeks 1 through 6. And, he's shown he had a tight end 1 week back with Dobbs, obviously last week with Clayton too, and I'm not going to count that against him. But I think we got to just address the big thing about this game is Kyler Murray's back, Ty. So what does that mean for fantasy? Kyler Murray's back.
No, what does that mean for fantasy, Cameron? I'm not talking about this game. I'm turning it back to you. There's too much pent-up frustration in this game for me.
That's
between
true.
Zach Ertz on the Arizona side of things, but then Atlanta and Arthur freaking Smith are I'm going to turn this one back to you.
All right. Here's the thing with Kyler Murray. He's great for fantasy when he's healthy. He probably is healthy. He could have a great game, coming out in this one, but we're not going to bank on it, right? We talked about Deshaun Watson earlier. If you're sitting here between Deshaun Watson and Kyler Murray, we're going to lean Watson just because, Kyler hasn't seen a game since I think it was week 14 last season.
I mean, pretty much a year.
Yeah. And so we're not going to bank on him being back fully healthy, but we do. I mean, it's obviously going to be a lot better than Clayton Tune. It's probably going to be similar, production to what we've seen with Josh Dobbs, at least this week 1. And as it progresses, I think it's only going to get better. So that's why we like Hollywood Brown. We like McBride, but we're not expecting, Kyler to go out here and rush 10 times for 70 yards and put up one of his master classes. We're expecting him to be solid, not great.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. Well, Kyler though, do not be surprised if we don't see him scramble and have as many rushing attempts as we are used to seeing him have. Big contract, coming back from his injury, first game back in, like we said, in almost a year. I don't think the rushing production is going to be what we want it to be right away. And the fact, and he goes up against Atlanta, and Atlanta has been pretty good against quarterbacks. And I know Josh Dobbs just put up 24 on it, but let's be serious for a second.
For sure.
66 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. That great skill by Josh Dobbs, but I don't know if that happens every single game to Atlanta. So I think it is better to err on the side of caution and patience with Kyler this week.
Yeah, that's really what it is. I mean, obviously, if you're going, hey, I got Mahomes on bye, or I got Kyler, or
Jared Goff.
Yeah, and then I would go Goff there. But if you're looking at what his name is, Tyler Page, I don't know why I can't remember Tyson Bagent. Then I would go Kyler Murray. I mean, but he's probably going to be closer to that quarterback 20 in our rankings.
Here, I'll say this: Geno Smith has been abysmal this year. I like Geno Smith just a little bit more than Kyler Murray this week.
For sure. All right. This next game is not going to take us very long to talk about. It's the Giants at Dallas. A big reason for that is because Giants got destroyed in week 1, and now they're going to try and start Tommy DeVito against this Cowboys team. And I think they're playing in Dallas.
Yeah, in Dallas.
So they destroyed him in New York. Now they're going to Dallas with Tommy DeVito. I mean, you got to start Tony Pollard. You got to start CeeDee Lamb. And I think you got to start Saquon. Dak, I guess I would put Dak ahead of Zach Ertz, but I'm not calling him a start. And the only other person I would start in this whole game is the Cowboys defense, because they might score more points than both offenses combined in this week. And Dallas's offense could score 4 touchdowns, right? I mean, they might have 5 touchdowns in this game. It's going to be absolutely ridiculous. But I'm not touching anyone on the Giants side other than Saquon.
No, player we forgot to mention, Jake Ferguson. You got to play him too.
Sure.
He is done very well the last couple of weeks, and just last week he had 10 targets against the Eagles. Granted, he has scored in both games, but he's another guy that you got to start at this point.
For sure. There you go. I think that pretty much does it for that game. I'm sorry, Dallas and New York Giants fans. There's just not much more to say about that one.
Well, and what else can we say that's different than what you are already thinking?
Exactly. Next, we have Washington at Seattle.
Oh gosh,
you're starting Kenneth Walker. Even though it's been, kind of a bumpy road, I feel like, you got to continue to start him. You're starting Terry McLaurin. Let's talk about these 3 Seattle wide receivers. JSN, who's had back-to-back 12-point games. Tyler Lockett, who led the team in snaps last year from the tight or wide receiver position. And then you got DK Metcalf, who was struggled, from expectations this year. So, Ty, what are you thinking? What are we doing with Seattle wide receiving core?
I will start off by saying I don't think you can predict which one is going to have the best week out of the 3 of them. I mean, DK Metcalf missed week 7, came back in week 8 and had a 39% target share. But then in week 9, he had a 14% target share, and it was Tyler Lockett and JSN who kind of took over. Like I don't think there's any, substance that you can look at and go, oh, this is why DK will have a good game, or this is why JSN will have a good game. Does it come down to is it going to be a close game? Is it going to be a blowout? Like, that's kind of my initial leaning, but I can't say that with full confidence. Mm-hmm. So we're at week 10 at this point, and I was thinking about this earlier too. We're at week 10. I don't think we can just keep calling this Seattle wide receiver room like eventually they'll turn it around, or that you got to keep starting DK because he'll turn it around eventually or whatnot. Like, it's week 10. It's ugly, and you might be at a spot just because, again, we've got Kansas City, Miami, Philly, and the Rams on bye that you might have to start locking in DK. But I just don't feel great about starting Seattle wide receivers at this point, because you can't predict which one's going to have a game and which one's just going to fall flat on their face.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like we're just waiting for JSN to really take off here and put one of them, kind of in the back seat is kind of what it feels like we're preparing for. And, that might not happen till next year. That might, I'm not going to say it's for sure going to happen this year, but that kind of feels like they're just like, okay, let's see how many opportunities we can give JSN without, making Lockett and DK mad before, until we get to the point where, oh yeah, look how good he is, we have to give him these targets, kind of a thing.
Yeah, well, and then you've got Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker in their own situation in the backfield. So it's just like this. You can't if someone can
too many weapons,
right? You got too many weapons. So if someone can explain to me, like, what is Seattle trying to do, who they want to, premiere or not premiere, who they want to showcase in this offense, please let us know, because we're 10 weeks into the season, and I have yet to find one person that actually knows what's actually going on in Seattle.
For sure. And then the other guy we want to talk about quick is Jahan Dotson. He was our best kept secret guy this year. It took a little bit to get going, but he has been looking good. I mean, I don't think there's ever a question of how talented he was. It was, are they ever going to use him? And over the last 3 weeks, 8 targets, 10 targets, 8 targets, including a top 10 finish last week. And at the same time, they're still using Terry McLaurin, who's out targeted him over the last 3 weeks. He's seen 28 targets in those 3 games. And like you were telling me earlier, Ty, Sam Howell's the fantasy quarterback 6 right now. So they're finally starting to click. They're saying, hey, it was like, they were like, okay, we're going to establish a run. And it was like, you know what? Our running backs aren't that great. Hey, this Terry guy's really good. Oh, hey, this Jahan Dotson guy's really good. And now they're like, hey, let's start rolling with this a little bit more. So hopefully they have it figured out. But yeah, it's fun to see the reemergence of Jahan Dotson halfway through this year.
Yeah, now it is worth mentioning. Geez, hello. What happened on ESPN? It's worth mentioning that Curtis Samuel left week 8 early, missed week 9. Those are the 2 games that we've seen Jahan Dotson do pretty well. So if Curtis Samuel plays, I will be rooting my butt off for Jahan Dotson to keep the streak going, because not only does he deserve to, because he's got the talent to, but that's what the offense should be. Like Curtis Samuel, sure, he can get like 4 or 5 targets a game. He should not be pretty much being used as the wide receiver 2 over Jahan Dotson. That's just criminal in my opinion. But I don't know if that's a scheme thing or that's a quarterback thing. So I will stay away. I will stay out of it.
For sure. All right. Then we got our Sunday night football game. We're all excited for it. Zach Wilson versus Aiden O'Connell, just like we were hoping for. You got the Jets versus the Vegas Raiders, who do have a little bit new life with Antonio Pierce at the helm. Josh McDaniels. We'll see how long it lasts, but it is there for at least right now. They're smoking cigars in the
after beating the Giants.
Yeah.
Come on now, guys.
Hey, it's the start of the new regime. He's a player's coach. The only real obvious starts at this point with the way the last couple of weeks have gone is Breece Hall and Josh Jacobs, the running backs. But I will say, you should start both those, elite wide receivers on the other side. Garrett Wilson, you have to start just from the fact that his volume has been nuts. 14, 7, 12, 13 targets over his last 5 games.
Pretty sure he's like top 3, top 5 in target share of all wide receivers.
In the last 5 games, he is second in targets per game to only Jamar Chase. Which is crazy. And Jamar Chase, which makes it even more crazy, didn't exactly have a ton of targets in that Buffalo game. It's just he has had so many targets in the 4 games prior to that. And then I feel like you have to start Devontae Adams this week. I know it's not a great matchup. I mean, he's got sauce. I know it. But he's finally happy. I mean, actually, this is all okay.
Are you saying this for yourself since you had Devontae on your fantasy team?
This is 100% narrative based. So I'll let Ty talk me out of this. He's happy. He didn't need the targets last week because they just blew the Giants out of the water. He's seen 5, 12, 7, and 7 targets over his last 4 games. Not great, but not terrible. And they only have 1 goal rest of the season because they're like, we're adamant they weren't going to trade him for some reason. And that's going to be to make Devontae Adams happy. They have no other purpose for playing. They're not going to make a playoff spot at this point. Josh Jacobs is on the franchise tag. They're not going to re-sign him. Their only goal moving forward is going to be to try and make Devontae Adams happy. So, Ty, why don't you tell me why we should sit Devontae Adams?
So, there's more to the Jets, shutting down wide receivers than just listing out the fact that they're allowing the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. But third lowest is Seattle with 106. Second lowest is Denver with 97. The Jets are last or are allowing the fewest with 70.5 over 4 games. They're only allowing 34 receptions over that stretch. They're allowing 346 yards per across that stretch, 0 touchdowns. I get that you start Devontae Adams because it's Devontae Adams. But man, it is not pretty. And if I would even say that Jacoby Myers is probably a sit this week. Even when you look at the track record that he has this year, he's probably the one that you got to sit, but you still got to fire out Devontae Adams, but you just got to lower expectations.
So I do want to throw this out there. The reason they look so good is they held the New York Giants to -1 receiving yards at the wide receiver position in the game.
Yeah, but still, hold on. It is NFL football. You don't do that.
Keenan Allen this last stretch, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 77 yards. AJ Brown, 9 receptions, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 131 yards. So there is hope for Devontae, but the best wide receiver 2 during that stretch was Devonta Smith with 5 receptions for 44 yards. So yes, I would agree Jacoby Myers is a sit, but I do think Devontae Adams is too elite to sit on your bench.
Well, so yes, and the other point that I forgot to mention, Aiden O'Connell is the quarterback. Okay, has he played a secondary like the Jets? I don't think so. You still, yes, it's an elite talent in Devontae Adams. You still have to play him because how asinine does it sound? I'm going to sit Devontae Adams this week. Come on now. You still play him, but it's not great.
Gotta love it. Alrighty. Lastly, we got the Monday Night Football game, Denver at Buffalo. I'm sure when they were making these games, they're like, "Hey, we actually got a pretty good slate for these late games." You know,
Was
we got
this game
Aaron Rodgers versus Vegas, and then Russell Wilson and Sean Payton are going to turn it around to play the Bills, and now they're like, "Wow, we got a couple of stinkers coming up here."
I swear this game was probably like scheduled last year, and they're like, "Oh, it's Russell Wilson against Josh Allen."
And then again this year, they're like, "Oh yeah, we got to keep it because we got Sean Payton back."
Sean Payton's back.
Yeah. Well, actually, obviously you're starting Stephon Diggs, you're starting Josh Allen, excuse me, helmet, and then Dalton Kincaid in this one. But I want to play a little game here. We're going to choose between some running backs, and then we're going to choose between some wide receivers, and I'm going to make you pick.
So the first one all falls on me. I get it.
Yep. First one is our running back game. Running backs, I'm going to give a little information on. Wide receivers, I'm just going to have you pick because I was a little lazy there. Running backs, James Cook, he had 6 carries in the last game, but the Bills as a whole only had 8 running back carries, which is crazy to me. They did add Leonard Fournette. Denver is also giving up the 11th most points to fantasy running backs over the last 5 weeks. But before his 6-carry game, he was having 12, 14, and 12 carries in the 3 weeks prior. But he was running back 33, then he was running back 8, and then he was running back 33 in that stretch. And on the opposite side, the guy you're deciding between with him is Javonte Williams. He was returned from injury in week 6. He saw a 35% snap share the week he came back, then 53%, and then a 63% game before their bye last week. He had 27 carries in that snow game against Kansas City. It feels like it's his backfield at this point, and the Bills are allowing 9th most points to running backs in that same stretch. So, Ty, who are you going with in this game? Are you going to ride the hot hand, Javonte Williams, or do you think James Cook turns it around a little bit here?
Drum roll, please. Javonte Williams.
Ooh.
It's Javonte Williams. Look, I give James Cook a pass for last week and not being threatened really by Leonard Fournette or Latavius Murray. But we are now 2nd week into this kind of potential 3-headed backfield or, three back committee or whatever we want to call it. Over the last 2 weeks in Denver before going on their bye week, Javonte Williams was leading Broncos running backs in snap count on a 60-40 split, but the 40% was split between Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin. So it was really a 60-20-20 split. And Javonte was dominating rushing attempts. He was getting 72% of the rushing attempts. And Perine and McLaughlin combined 19%. Oof. Dominating rushing attempts. So, right, and the other part of this too, Javonte has done well with his touches. That's the other crucial part to this. You can get touches, but you can be a Dameon Pierce and just only get 2 yards of carry. No, Javonte has been doing much better with his touches. So I'm a big fan of Javonte for the rest of the season, if I'm completely honest, just based on the volume that he's going to get.
For sure. Yeah, I would lead Javonte Williams as well in this one. And then wide receivers, I'm going to make you pick one of these 4 quick. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Gabe Davis. Then I wanted to give Khalil Shakir a shout out. I don't think he's actually in this tier, but I do want to give the shout out. So between those 4, if you had to pick one to start this week, who are you going to go with?
I
know who you want to say.
What, you want me to say Gabe Davis?
No, I know you want to say Jerry Jeudy with everything in you, but I know it's actually a harder decision than that.
No, I actually kind of lean Cortland Sutton.
I think I do too, just because of the touchdown upside has been
the touchdown upside. And like Jerry Jeudy has gotten, somewhat of an uptick in targets and stuff. Last 2 weeks, he's had a 24% target share to Cortland Sutton's 21%. But like you said, it's the touchdown upside.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's your hope. I hope we're wrong. I hope after this bye, Jerry Jeudy just kind of turns it back on. That he gets acclimated to this offense. That the reason it took him this long to get going is just because he missed those couple of weeks, and then we can start feeling better about it. But at this point, I think Cortland Sutton's probably the safest play out of those four. Alrighty, should we do some fellas full fade?
Yeah,
full fellas fade. Well, you guys were abysmal last week without me, so I'm here to save the day.
Tyler, our picks.
Jonathan Taylor over 63.5 yards, which I think he actually hit.
I was going to let me confirm.
And then Adam Thielen over receiving yards, which was terrible by Lucas.
I don't know why we picked one of the worst matchups of the week to pick on, but we
don't ask me. I wasn't here. I couldn't correct you guys on your mistakes. I know you did go at least 1 for 2, and
he had 47 yards.
For 2. That's what we call a loss. Pretty abysmal. So I'm here to turn it around for you guys. So Tyler, don't fail me with your pick. Who are you taking this week in the full fellas fade?
I am taking Will Levis higher than 213.5 passing yards. We talked about it in that Tampa Tennessee matchup that you're starting Will Levis just because the matchup is great. And before you say, well, again, they just allowed a ton of yards to CJ Stroud. So how can, they surely didn't allow that many yards before that game. No, they were allowing the second most on a per game basis before week 9. So, and it was actually over 3. It's actually over 300 yards. So, Will Levis 213. The fact that he's gone higher in both of his games too, against Atlanta and Pittsburgh. And Tampa has a good run defense too. So, yes, Derrick Henry will get his, but if Tennessee wants to win this game, it's gonna have to be through the air.
Let's lock it in. Will Levis higher than 213.5 passing yards.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And from living down in the Tampa area for the last year and a half, I can attest that people are have been frustrated for a little while with this secondary. So I think it's a very good pick. I think mine is better though, and that's why I went with Deontay Johnson higher than 59.5 receiving yards. Jair over the last 2 games has given up 64 yards in each. They just traded Rasul Douglas, who I know is a safety, but
he's kind of that like safety.
He's a defensive back. He's not necessarily a corner. And so, got rid of a little help in the secondary. I don't even think Jair is going to follow him the full game. We were talking about it earlier with 2 guys like Pickens and Deontay. He'll probably split his time between the 2. And Deontay's put up 80 or 79 plus over his last 3 games. Since he's been back, he has just dominated. Really, the target share has dominated the yards, and I don't really see it stopping in this one. So I'm going to lock in Deontay higher than 59.5 receiving yards. Perfect. Well, I think that really just wraps it up. We talked about a lot of players on this. I said 28 at the beginning, but we definitely hit like 50.
Yeah. Do we want to do a quick recap? Kidding.
Khalil Shakir, Gabe Davis Jr. Just list off the players. Here's our credits. Roll through. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. As always, if you enjoyed the show, leave us a little review on YouTube on the audio podcast. We always appreciate that. We always have content coming out. Luke says his must starts coming out on Friday. Ty waiver wire on Monday. I got my trade buy low, sell high. I only got a couple more episodes of those left with trade deadlines coming up. So
same here for waivers. You can always use waivers, but
we're
scraping the barrel here with waivers.
Yeah. we might have to be pivoting pretty soon here to some other type of content. We will continue content, but we'll see what is coming up. And always, we got shorts coming up for you. If you want to follow us on Twitter, I'm at CamLawFFF on Twitter and TikTok. Tyler is at Tyler_Plath on Twitter. If you want to follow the fellows. At Fantasy Football Fellas on YouTube and TikTok, at The Fellas on Instagram, and at FF Fellas on Twitter. But yeah, I think that wraps it up. I hope that we are able to help you, land this Week 10 win, put you in position for a deep playoff run. And I guess, Ty, do you got anything else to say to the people?
Best of luck to you guys this week. Use our advice, use it wisely, and let's win some matchups.
Yes. Thank us when we get it right. Don't tell us about it when we get it wrong. That's what we want to hear. Alrighty.
Bingo.
But yeah, with that, we will see you guys next week on the podcast, and deuces.